pairs. Facts and opinion. Their future in our hands. Markets. Globalist technocrats versus the people. A line in the sand. The McIntyre Report.
And welcome, folks. Jamie McIntyre reporting here live for Australian National Review. McIntyre Report, ANR.news for our 24-hour news headlines. And support independent media, things you're certainly not going to hear on the fake news media, because fake news media tends to like to sell you fake pandemics and fake vaccines and to lie to you on Facebooks to impress your, or should we say Facebook, to impress your fake friends. We've seen through the COVID pandemic that, a lot of the things we're told by our government and media turned out to be absolute nonsense. And the things that we were telling people here at Australian National Review and other independent media that we were told was misinformation were actually censored, banned, deplatformed, deleted, even attacked, threatened legally and criminally, even in Australia, where we had to actually move out of Australia for journalists being harassed and threatened, some journalists even jailed. For what? Because we told people maybe not to take an injection for a hyped flu. So many people, I used to be a pro-vaxxer. Like many of us, we were believed in what the so-called science told us. We believed in what the government told us. We simply didn't question. I was naive. I was gullible. I must admit, I was ignorant up until 2013. But when we launched Australian National Review, we had a load of whistleblowers, scientists and doctors sending us in detailed data saying, the vaccine industry is involved in cover-up of death and injuries. Now, this was back in 2013. And they couldn't understand when they sent this information to mainstream media why they did nothing about it. So at independent media, we started to look into it, and we realized, and we made a clear halt to stop pushing any vaccine propaganda, which the government was paying news outlets to spread, and obviously pharmaceutical companies, and say, well, hey, there's something to this. This led me to doing my own investigations into the fraud of the vaccine industry, and I wrote a book in 2016 called The Great Vaccine Con, put up $1 million challenge at the time for anyone to prove that any vaccine was properly safety tested and effective, or let alone necessary. Robert Kennedy Jr. at the time put up 100,000. Robert De Niro, who was also questioning autism links to vaccines, put up 100,000. But of course, that money still stands because no one's been able to prove it. Now, this was before COVID. And then we've seen, obviously, with COVID, we predicted back in 2016 that the industry was planning to mandate vaccines and to get sales from little as 5 billion in 2002 up to over 150 billion annual sales by 2022. That was our prediction in 2016, and that they would do that by mandating vaccines. That seemed like an outrageous conspiracy theory in 2016. I was attacked as an anti-vaxxer. Australian National Review was attacked, as were other independent journalists. But they don't say too much these days because who turned out to be selling the misinformation? It's turned out that we were highlighting the truth from the very early stages about this industry. Our next guest, some of you may have heard of, we've shared many of his articles, Steve Kirsch, a tech entrepreneur turned investigative journalist, and he's been on this journey too, once being a pro-vaxxer. We'll hear from him. He was on Tucker Carlson recently. Let's just hear what...
We're also doing this in a context, and the context is the spring of 2021, where you are not allowed to question the vaccine if you want to remain friends with people, if you want to be considered a serious person, if you don't want to be trashed on Wikipedia as you have been. And so you spend your whole life gathering accolades, going to, impressive schools, making a ton of money, being celebrated in the press. And you must know on some level, because you're smart, that if you start talking about this stuff, all of that is over and you're going to be a thought criminal and people are going to look at you sideways. Did you know that?
No, I had no idea. I thought that if I told the truth and I let people know about the facts and the data that I had uncovered, that people would basically say, oh, you're right, this looks like a big problem. And I told my wife, before I did this, I said, hey, this will be over in 2 weeks. If the data is so clear that this is going to be done in 2 weeks. We're still at it after all this time.
Well, let's welcome to the show. Steve, welcome to the show. You're obviously on Tucker Carlson. And what I'd love to know, firstly, is what woke you up to, I guess we could say, the fraud of the vaccine industry, or the fact that maybe these things aren't as safe as they've been telling us?
I had gotten the 2 shots of Moderna, and I started getting some hints. I got a message from one of my Twitter followers, and she asked me, "Is the vaccine safe?" And I sent her a message. Of course it's safe. It's the safest thing ever. I mean, it's been thoroughly tested and so forth. And I said, "Why are you asking this question? I thought everybody knew that." And she said, "Well, 3 of my relatives got the shot and they're dead. All 3 of them are dead a week after they got the shot. And they were perfectly healthy before they got the shot." And I said, "Oh, no, that's impossible. It couldn't have been the vaccine because the vaccine is perfectly safe. They say it can't kill more than 1 person per million. So the chance of that happening is 1 in 10 to the 18th. Can't happen." And she said, "Yeah, but they're dead." And so that was a little bit of a eye-opening moment for me. And then my carpet cleaner comes in to clean our carpets a week later, and he shows up at the door and he's wearing a mask. And so I'm giving him a hard time. I said, "Don't you know that if you get 2 shots, you don't have to wear a mask?" And he said, "Well, I couldn't get the second shot." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, I had a heart attack 2 minutes after the first shot."
Wow.
And he said that his wife had Parkinson's in the arm that she got her shot. So at that point, I knew that, that's a little bit too many black swans that I've been seeing in a week's time. And so I decided to spend a little time to investigate. And about a week later, I had written a 250-page article for Trial Site News describing what I had found, which was horrendous. These vaccines should have never been approved. That's my wake-up story, is basically seeing troubling stories from friends.
Yeah, that's that would wake up anyone, I think, obviously seeing that. And obviously leading up before that, obviously you would have just been, like most of us, I guess, a pro-vaxxer, you believing, never really questioning the so-called science and just believing what the government and media told us.
Yep. Absolutely. I was certainly in that camp. It took a few days before I was convinced that the government was wrong and that my friends were right. And then I spent the other a few days just collecting info to write my article. But it was so obvious. I mean, every data set was flashing red alert, danger. This is very, very unsafe. There was nothing I found that would lead me to believe that I made the right decision in getting vaccinated. And it's been one of the biggest, probably the biggest regret of my life to have done that.
Yeah, and you're not in a camp of there's a lot of smart people that took the vaccine. Like you look at Elon Musk, I think Elon said that, he took 4 vaccines, the 4th one nearly killed him before he realized that, my God, there's something wrong with this. So it's amazing. Intelligent people can be very smart, but we all, I guess, have a blind spot, or like a lot of us just simply took it for granted that we would never be lied to. What happened when you started speaking out though? Obviously you're a former tech entrepreneur, and obviously you'd be labeled as an anti-vaxxer. What happened when you started speaking out? Was it what you expected, or you're surprised?
Oh, I expected to be listened to and the data evaluated and my claims evaluated, and people would take it seriously because this is such an important thing that we get this right. And what I found is that people wouldn't talk to me. They said I was wrong. I had a 12-member scientific advisory board, and they all quit. And I asked them, was there a mistake in the article that I wrote? Because I wasn't aware of any mistakes. And they said, no, you're an evil person. We don't want to talk to you. So it's interesting that they won't engage. They basically have their belief system, and if you go against their belief system, then you're an intellectual criminal, I guess. And so they don't want to engage with you. And people said, never talk to me again. I mean, that's the kind of reaction that we got from people and, from our friends as well, saying you're an evil person. Of course, the vaccines are safe. You have to trust the authorities. All these Harvard professors can't be wrong. You're a guy who has computer science background and you don't understand. You're not a doctor. You don't understand medicine. And therefore you're misinterpreting the data and you're just going off on, some tangent that makes no sense, because all of the people whose profession it is to be experts in infectious disease say this vaccine is safe and effective, and so therefore you must be wrong. And so there are all these attempts to gaslight you into believing that you don't know what you're talking about. But I've got a couple of degrees from MIT. I'm pretty smart, and there's something called math and statistics, and you can't violate statistics. And this stuff just violates not all these statistics about what safe looks like. And it's that people just don't want to look at the data at all, because number one, they never look at data. Number two, even if they saw the data, they don't know how to analyze it. So it's all about trusting people. And of course, you're going to trust the CDC and these academic professors and what's in the peer-reviewed literature before you're going to trust someone, a computer science guy from MIT, who says that the sky is falling. I mean, it's a bit like being, sort of Chicken Little. And I tried to warn people, and then when I left the room, then people were mocking me, like, is Steve okay? Is he mentally stable? It's
it sounds like it's almost like it's a religion, like vaccine. People take vaccines almost like indoctrinated, like that. You questioned it, and how dare you? Like, you're no longer part of the club. Have you found though, Steve, that obviously that's when you first started speaking out? How are things changed now that it's becoming much more common knowledge that, hey, there is a problem with these vaccines, and many people, unfortunately, are no longer with us or seriously injured? I mean, it's getting harder and harder to deny there's a serious problem.
Not a single person has apologized.
Wow.
Not one. Nobody has said, hey, sorry, that was my mistake. Can we still be friends? Nobody has gone to that extent of acknowledging it. It's just basically silence and non-communication. That's how it goes.
So I guess it's a matter of two people really don't want to know now. They've injected themselves with something that is not good for them. Ignorance is bliss, I guess they think. But unfortunately, some of these people, there's obviously, what do you think about the protocols? There's obviously people that have been vaccinated. They go, what can I do? What can I do now? I've taken, many people more than 2 vaccines. Have you looked into that? What are you helping people as far as what's your recommendation they should do to try and maybe detox from these vaccines to try and help themselves?
I get a good doctor who will look at your symptoms and look at your blood work, because it's not a one-size-fits-all, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's let me look at what your problems are, and if you have this, then do that. And so it's all very individual at this point. There's no magic pill.
Yeah. And as far as I heard, obviously, New Zealand government is not that fond of you. You want to tell us a little bit about what happened there with the New Zealand data that come out from whistleblowers? And I don't know whether you've ever been to New Zealand. I'm not sure they'll let you go there.
Well, I'm not excited to go back. I have been to New Zealand and before this happened, but Barry Young, who was a database administrator at Health New Zealand, basically was looking at the data and he was super concerned. So he brought it to the attention of his management and they ignored him. So he released this data to me to analyze. And I looked at it and I said, this is very troubling. And I tried to get a dialogue going with the Ministry of Health, and they refused to engage with me at all. They sent me cease and desist letters. They contacted my hosting company to have my site taken down, which they complied with. They just tried to stop me. But I'm a journalist. The information was leaked to me. I have every right to publish it. They have no legal grounds, and I was quite upset at the hosting company for taking my site down without any warning whatsoever. I mean, like, they didn't even reach out to me. And then when I contacted them and said, "Hey, why is my site down?" They said, "Well, all your data's been deleted and we can't tell you why. We're not going to talk about it, but we're doing an investigation." Well, gosh, doing an investigation, huh? So I thought when you do an investigation, you talk to both parties, in which case, and I'm the principal party. They never asked me any questions at all.
Wow. So it's not like the New Zealand government said, "Thank you for analysing this data. We'll look into it. Maybe there's an issue here." It's clearly, it appears that they're into cover-up. So obviously they have something to hide.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and they've changed Barry Young just recently posted that they changed the criminal charges that they're charging him with after, I think it's been at least 2 years. So they were charging him with this violation of some criminal statute, but he didn't violate the criminal statute. So they've finally figured that out after 2 years, and so they invented another thing to try to put him in jail for. I don't know what the new thing is. I may be able to look it up here while we're chatting.
It's almost like he's becoming the Julian Assange of New Zealand. I mean, he wasn't a journalist. He was just like worked for and shared information which you should share without concerning. And you want to tell us a bit about what that data said?
Yeah. Well, Barry has a heart of gold, and he was just trying to save lives. And he wrote back. I said, "What are the new charges?" He said, "Same crime, different evidence." So, let me tell you, the only thing Barry has to get out of this is 20 years in prison for doing this. Like, who would? He doesn't benefit from alerting the public to the data. I mean, look, it's the public's data. The public should have access to this data. Why are they hiding the data? And there are epidemiologists in New Zealand who had lots of opportunities to look at the data and write an analysis showing, "Hey, nothing to see here, folks. It's perfectly normal. This vaccine's perfectly safe." No such paper ever came out for some reason. Can't figure that one out. And the Czech data, the Czech Republic published record level data, and it shows that there's no benefit at all from the vaccine. In fact, the vaccine is much more likely to kill you than to save you. There's no the vaccine can only benefit through reducing the case fatality rate or reducing the number of infections. And it's very clear from the data that the infections didn't go down and the case fatality rate didn't go down either. And nobody's been able to challenge me on this. People say, "Oh, no, you're wrong, because the reason the case fatality rate didn't go down is because there are no cases when you're vaccinated." Well, you see, that's just not true, because a couple of days ago, I looked at the people born in 1940 versus 1950 in the Czech Republic. And if you look at those cohorts, you find that they were vaccinated at different times. The 1940-year-olds were vaccinated 6 weeks earlier than the people born in 1950. So if you're vaccinated 6 weeks earlier, then this downtrend, which happened, after the vaccines rolled out, the cases just dropped. So you'd expect that there would be a 6-week delta between the drop of the 1940 and then 6 weeks later, the drop of the 1950s. Guess what? They're identical. They're on top of each other. It's like there's one or two hypotheses. If the vaccine worked, in which case the curves are offset. It didn't work at all, in which case the downtrend is due to the virus itself burning out naturally. They were on top of each other. There's no question there was no benefit in terms of infection. So then there's the case fatality rate. Well, case fatality rate, the infections didn't reduce. So when you roll out the vaccines, the case fatality rate should plummet, go down by 90% because they rolled out this life-saving vaccine to all of the vulnerable people in the Czech Republic. What happened? Case fatality rate went up for the whole population. And there's no other way to interpret this. I mean, I even went and had a chat with Grok, and and Grok was convinced that the vaccines have saved millions of lives. And I said, well, check out this data, and here's the spreadsheet with the original data. And it said, that's interesting. You're right. Probably 90% chance that the vaccines killed hundreds of thousands of people. So you have Grok is great, and ChatGPT is great now because they're not taking the stance like you're crazy, this can't be true. They're actually listening to what you say and evaluating it. And when I gave it compelling evidence like this Czech data, which is record level data, it's the gold standard data, it said, yep, you're right. These studies that claim these benefits, they're using data that they don't disclose publicly, and then they're doing these adjustments with the Cox proportional hazards model, and so they can vary all these parameters in the model. And it's great when you have lots of parameters because then you can have any outcome that you want. And so they have this wonderful proof that, well, when you look at the raw data, there's no effect, there's no impact. In fact, the vaccine looks like it's killing people. But when we apply these magical transformations, which we call adjustments, then look, there's a 90% mortality benefit. Voila! And it's so deceptive.
Quick ad break, but when we come back, I want to talk to you specifically about the increase in excess death rates in New Zealand, in Australia, in America, in most countries that were heavily vaccinated. Let's talk about that and what they're saying is causing the excess deaths versus what the reality is. We're back in 1 second.
McIntyre Report.
Welcome back, folks. Jamie McIntyre here on behalf of Australian National View. You just saw there an event coming up. Australian National View is hosting the first independent media summit and a media awards night. I'm here joined today with Steve Kirsch. Will also be one of the speakers, Steve. We look forward to having you at that event in Australia coming up July 19th, 20th. Steve, excess death rates have increased. I think they started increasing in January 2022, maybe even slightly before that, after the vaccines were rolled out. I mean, they're meant to save people's lives. How are more people dying after taking the vaccine? What's going on?
That vaccine's killing them. There was a paper that I saw recently, and it plotted the excess deaths, and it plots the cumulative excess deaths. And what happens is that the line goes up a 45-degree angle. It's quite stunning. Now, if the vaccine worked, then that line that goes up, it should have flatlined and started going down after the vaccine rolled out. Didn't move. So, a little hard. And this is just looking at like all of Europe. It was quite the stunning study.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I heard Singapore as an example, which obviously a small, closed environment, an island economy, that they started not publishing their excess death rates as it got so high that the reports were jumped as high as 37%, and they stopped publishing it because they were freaking out. I know in Australia in 2022, I think it reached something like 18%. I don't know what New Zealand was. But my concerns are twofold. One, it appears that they overhyped or certainly overstated the deaths from COVID. They appeared to account, which is a little bit of a trick they did with the AIDS pandemic years ago. It appears that Fauci and Gates cut their teeth on the AIDS pandemic. So it's not the first time they've kind of had an idea how to profit or use a pandemic for other purposes. But in the sense that the amount of people that we're told died of COVID, should that data be questioned? Because a lot of them died from other things. That should COVID have been blamed for all these deaths?
Oh, absolutely. In the U.S., you can look at the COVID deaths and they didn't go down. Now, they probably did, but what happened is that the vaccines took up the slack. So if you look at any age group, any older age group, you'll find that they had an excess mortality that after the vaccines rolled out didn't go away. It was the same for the next couple of years. So if the vaccine worked and reduced mortality, which it didn't, but what happened is that the variants were milder. So fewer people were dying from COVID, but the vaccine took up the slack because the vaccines are basically killing as many people as COVID was. So orders of magnitude. So we're looking in the U.S., it's somewhere on the order of 600,000 deaths over the first 2 years of the pandemic caused by the vaccine. So our government literally has killed 500,000 Americans. I mean, and nobody's going to jail.
Yeah, it's shocking. Fauci, obviously, in Australia, I remember calling out our Premier, Dan Andrews, at the time, Dictator Dan. Melbourne, as you might know, was one of the most locked down cities on the planet. That in the future, politicians such as this will not be able to walk around safely in Australia or in America. And I was called out that I was advocating violence. I said, well, I'm not advocating violence. I'm just predicting that these individuals will not be safe because people will be so angry. Now, I would suspect that Fauci probably wants security to walk around the street in America. Is he him and Gates, some of the most hated people on the planet, you think, now? Because a lot of people are pretty upset about what's going on.
Oh, for sure. And I can tell you that Fauci does have police protection probably 24/7.
Yeah, that kind of says a lot about it. Now, a lot of people I know want to see Fauci jailed. What's your view? Elon Musk spoke out pretty much like, I think he thinks Fauci should be jailed. Do you think, he should be held accountable?
I think he was a key perpetrator in this. So I think that the punishment should fit the crime. It was his work that created the virus in the first place. So he gets credit for creating a virus that has wreaked havoc on the entire world and has killed, I don't know what the number is, probably tens of millions of people from that. But then he compounded the error by saying that the only way out is going to be these vaccines, which are safe and effective, which they weren't.
So the other concern I have, we look into this industry, is in Australia, and I think it's the same. It is the same in America, I think. The TGA in Australia is most of its funding comes from pharmaceutical companies. And the Professor Skerritt, who was the head of the TGA at the time through all this, despite being called in Senate hearings, etc., they're former working relationships, employees of vaccine companies, or they go and work for the government agency as a stepping stone to a lucrative career with pharmaceutical companies. So, and also, come out, you're probably aware of that, Fauci and them earn royalties on vaccines. So this is an obvious conflict of interest. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, clearly conflict of interest. Fauci was questioned in front of Congress and asked, well, how much are you making each time a vaccine is given? And Fauci just dodged the question. He said, well, that's in the public record, or you have to call my office, or I'd be happy to supply that, whatever. And of course, the information is never forthcoming. So there's clearly a conflict of interest. There was clearly, when the virus escaped from the lab, there was clearly a cover-up that was orchestrated, because the emails showed that the scientist that Fauci was talking to said that this looks like it's coming out of a lab. And then after a bunch of redacted conversations, they wrote this paper on natural origins, which is just complete bullshit, because the genetic sequences in the virus do not appear in nature. So it's a telltale fingerprint that this was not out of nature. And so the people that were involved in that paper then are deliberately trying to mislead the public so that Fauci could get off scot-free. And of course, they were richly rewarded subsequently through NIH grants that they got. So, hey, it's money makes the world go round, and Fauci's got access to lots of money that he can use to cover his tracks.
You'll even look at the World Health Organization. Gates, in the US had pulled out in the past. Gates become the largest private donor of that organization. I mean, it's basically, Gates is a vaccine crony, and the other funders are basically, it's like a vaccine crony outfit that's pushing vaccines upon the world. And we look at how that, I know in Australia, like how do you get everyone to be part of this? They go, it's just a wild conspiracy theory. It wasn't all organized, but if it comes from the top down, the chief medical advisors are told, here's the scripting from the World Health Organization. This is what you must do. It seemed to override even, the federal government in Australia, and it went straight to the state governments, and they implemented this. And even I know in Australia, the federal government said, well, we didn't say to do this. It was like an orchestrated way to, and even the lockdowns, let's talk about the lockdowns. We now know they were unnecessary. But my concern is this, Steve, is that some people go, just inadvertent errors, they made mistakes, etc. But to roll out to 8 billion people on the planet an untested vaccine for what was certainly appeared overhyped flu, virus, that's not inadvertent. That's premeditated. There's a lot of planning goes involved. Factories have to produce these things, etc. And then get these distributed. This is not an inadvertent act. This is premeditated. Does that concern you? How far does this go? Is this not just some corrupt officials, but is there a bigger agenda that this was a part of?
There's no smoking gun memo showing the bigger agenda. Nobody has come out saying, "Hey guys, I got the email from Gates saying it's time to to launch Plan B," or what have you. For something of this magnitude, you can't do it alone. There have to be a bunch of people collaborating, and getting everyone to collaborate and not say anything is difficult in today's age, because people are always leaking things, as the anonymous source told the press. So if there is a master plan, it's interesting that nobody has found the details or the smoking gun memo showing that. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means that we haven't found the smoking gun yet, if there is one. But it could all be that, hey, Fauci was playing with fire. The fire escaped somehow, or was deliberately let out, or who knows. And so people tried to then cover it up. It's very, very, very troubling.
Yeah, it's interesting. In when we're talking about Dan Andrews, a former premier at the time in Victoria, Australia, had come out recently in the mainstream media. Even last week, it actually come out. We've got a federal election coming up here in a few days, May 3rd in Australia. But it come out, Murdoch Papers, who, of course, have a paid-for relationship with Big Pharma and been very instrumental in pushing no jab, no pay in Australia, no jab, no pay. these are pharmaceutical companies effectively writing laws and then using media proprietors to push them into it. And that's what happened there. But they're coming out now going COVID con. They've seen the leaked memos where the lockdowns in Melbourne was never based on health advice. It was just based on the Premier and wherever he's getting his instructions from to do the lockdowns. It were never necessary for health. So, that's coming out in mainstream media. It was COVID con in that sense. My understanding, even, a lot of the governments knew that it wasn't as deadly as it was made out just before the lockdowns. The lethality of this. I mean, it's not saying people haven't died, but many people, were put on ventilators, remdesivir, these toxic drugs, and they banned, as you know, ivermectin, which seemed to be somewhat successful. What's your view on how they did that?
Baffling. If you're interested in saving lives, that was not the way to do it. The way to do it would be to embrace all of these innovations that doctors were doing to measure the outcomes and then keep doing the interventions that are helpful and not do the interventions that are harmful. I mean, that's how science works. But instead it was, ivermectin, let's make sure that nobody takes ivermectin, and let's make sure that people are only steered to drugs that are sold by pharmaceutical companies. Not the way to do it. Just doing a povidone iodine rinse a couple of times a day is extremely effective in killing bacteria in your nasal tract. And that's where, when you get a respiratory virus, that's where the respiratory virus sort of camps out and likes to replicate. So it makes a lot of sense that if you have this place where all these bad guys are congregating to multiply, that you wash them out with a fluid rush, just like you'd wash a car. And, that's why that sort of treatment, which at first I said, I don't get this. How does this make sense? Now I totally get it. It makes perfect sense. You're basically putting in a germ killer and putting it through your nose. And so these nasal rinses with dilute povidone iodine, you dilute it so that it's looks like a weak cup of tea. And then you just squirt it up your nose. You add 2 milligrams of salt for every 8 ounces of water, and that creates a nice saline solution. And then you add the right amount of the 10% povidone iodine solution that you can buy in any drugstore for about $8, and you have a extremely effective treatment for COVID. It's even better if you used it prophylactically, so you didn't get infected at the start. But if you do that once you realize that you're sick, that will reduce the bacteria that are or the virus that's multiplying in your nasal passages, and we'll have a much nicer outcome if you do that. But there's no talk about that. I mean, these are things that are very cheap, and they're off the shelf, and they're widely available.
Well, I think that's the reason, Steve, is that they're very cheap, is because there's no money to be made by Big Pharma. I mean, in comparison, say, remdesivir, which to my knowledge was a former banned Ebola drug, very deadly. And many people in the medical profession joke about it. End of life is near if you give remdesivir. Right. They tried to do it I actually saved my sister-in-law's life because I said she was sent to hospital. I said, and lucky contact in time, do not accept remdesivir. And they started giving it to her when many people once have given that. Clive Palmer, a billionaire in Australia, they gave, and then he actually stopped it, because it can kill so many people, or it did. But obviously these things are profitable. And if we study the history of Fauci and Gates, this is not the first time they've brought back drugs that were banned. And you look at AZT for treating AIDS. How many people died of AZT versus actual AIDS? I mean, there seems to be a pattern for some time of certainly profiteering from pandemics, or certainly hyping pandemics to boost the profits.
Yeah.
What's your hope, in wrapping up, last question, I guess, what's your hope of, I mean, what can people do, and what's your hope of where will this end? In the next couple of years, do you think we can see accountability or wasting our time?
Well, I hope this will be exposed by the current management of the Health and Human Services in America. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he knows what's going on. He's assembling a staff so that he can address these issues. So I have high hopes that we will see a giant shift in position. In the meantime, I've got $1 million bet with this guy, Sar Wolf, an Israeli entrepreneur who accepted my $1 million challenge. And so my job is to prove the vaccines killed more than saved to a panel of neutral judges, and his goal is to prove the opposite. So it'll be interesting because I asked him, well, what about the check data? He says, well, we like the check data. We'll be talking about that. I said, great. You know, it's great that we can agree on a data source, because then all we have to do is just agree to disagree on the interpretation of the data, and then it's much more clear for the judges. Because if I say, well, look over here, and there's this evidence, and he says, well, look over here, there's this evidence. It's much better if you're looking at the same piece of evidence, and it's just a matter of interpretation, because then it's much more clear about which interpretation is correct, because they can't both be right.
Exactly. Well, that'll be interesting. But just the other part of it, though, the longer it goes on, see, this is, if you look back, I mean, vaccines, how dangerous have they been from the beginning? How many people suffer cancer? So you could be vaccinated, say, in the 80s, and you die 30 years later from cancer. How would we know whether there's a linkage to the vaccine led to that cancer? So the point is, even with COVID vaccine, how many people are going to die the next 5-10 years, to say? And that we're never going to know that they could have actually, if they never took the vaccine, they may not have died. So they can kind of get away with it because, you know, if you die, and they try and deny if you die, drop dead a day after, let alone an hour after. Of course, they're going to deny a 5-10 year linkage. That's my concern. How many people could actually die? We don't know that. True?
Well, there are estimates. It's called the vaccine dose fatality rate. And those estimates are on the order of 0.15% on a per dose basis. So in other words, 660 million doses delivered in the United States in the first 2 years. So 660 million doses turns into 660,000 deaths. Just easy. You just take the million and turn it into thousands. And so you divide by 1,000. I mean, that's sort of the simple math, right? It's not quite that accurate, right? Because that would be a 0.1 vaccine dose fatality rate. This is a 0.15, so it's higher than that. So it's higher than 660. It's probably more like closer to 1 million people killed by the United States government using these vaccines. And it's confirmed when they do the surveys. There is a Rasmussen report that they surveyed Americans, and they asked, well, how many people do you know died from COVID? How many people do you know died from the vaccine? And the numbers are pretty equal. Numbers are within 10% of each other for died from COVID versus died from the vaccine. Now, the issue there is that there are a lot of people, 70% of Americans took the shot. So they're convinced that the vaccine is safe. So they're not going to see any harm. They're not going to see anytime someone dies unexpectedly, that is called dying unexpectedly. We don't know why the person died, but one thing we do know is the person didn't die from the vaccine. So that's 70% of your sample. So the fact that you've got equal numbers of people saying died from COVID versus died from that vaccine means that there's a much higher percentage of people who probably didn't take the shot saying, yeah, these things are super dangerous. So
So we were saying that because the data is skewed. Obviously, the amount that, as you know, would be listed as dying from COVID, if we took all that false data out. I mean, I interviewed a gentleman in the middle of COVID. His wife was dying of cancer, not from the vaccine, but she was dying. And he was contacted even before she had passed away that the hospital would offer, if when she does die, listed as a COVID death, they would give him $6,000. At the time, I believe Australian aged care homes and hospitals were getting something like $54,000 per COVID patient that died. I mean, we know, Steve, you would know as an entrepreneur, incentives change human behavior. I mean, this poor guy with his wife's not even dead yet, and they're offering money. And when she does die, can we list her as COVID? Now, this has been reported, even in America to be happening and around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I know people who've been offered that.
Yeah, a percentage who died of COVID actually died of COVID. Yeah. It could be ridiculously 10% of that figure.
Yeah, isn't it great that the government rewards people for dying from COVID? Like, if you want people to die from COVID, the best thing to do is give each hospital $50,000 if the person doesn't survive. Which do you think the hospital cares more about, the $50,000 or your life?
And then, of course, they're giving medical protocols, so it doesn't have to be a conspiracy because what I say...
Oh, that's right. All you have to do is follow those CDC protocols, and it's a guaranteed $50,000.
And give remdesivir,
I've heard it's more than that.
Ban, ivermectin, and then all of a sudden... So people I know how many doctors and nurses, I mean, there's many good ones, that just follow instructions. So they will give remdesivir if that's the medical protocol.
They follow instructions or they're fired.
Yeah, and so you can see it doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It just has to be from the top down. The WHO giving.
That's right. The incentives are do not say anything. If you say anything and speak out, we'll take away your medical license, we'll fire you, and you'll never be able to get a job for the rest of your life. Or you can tell the truth, in which you basically tell the truth and get punished for the rest of your life. Or you say no, you just keep your mouth shut and don't say anything because
even on
it could be a coincidence.
Reason
all these people dying, those are just coincidences.
Yeah. So the likelihood we wouldn't even have your good work or you speaking out, if you were typical, like if you weren't a tech entrepreneur who was fortunate enough to become financially successful where they can't control you with a license or so much, you probably would have been much more deep. If you had a job that you could be fired from, you'd be like,
absolutely.
Well, what price am I willing to pay to...
Right. Yeah, because my wife would kill me.
Yeah, so before
if I got fired.
Yeah. So,
right. Steve, why are you doing this? Let other people do this. Don't you do this. That would be exactly the attitude. And that's why they keep getting away with this stuff. Because if you speak out, you'll lose everything. So everybody shuts up and lets people die. That's the Hippocratic Oath.
So just quickly,
don't mess with pharma. That's the new oath. Don't cross pharma.
So you mentioned could be 1 million deaths in the USA alone. The government's killed with COVID. What's your estimate, or what do you believe is the most accurate estimates of deaths around the world to date from the COVID vaccine?
I think it's on the order of maybe 10 to 15 million people that have died.
Wow, 10 to 15 million. So if we were to go out 10 years from the vaccines being injected, I mean, who's to say that won't reach 100 million deaths?
Who's to say? I'm not going to say that.
We know.
Nobody knows. We don't have good data on it. Because it's hard, right? We don't have autopsy data. There's only one guy in the world who was doing autopsies, and he died. So it's not like there's I don't know anybody doing autopsies of COVID patients or people who died after the vaccine on a regular basis, right? It's never been done. They don't do it in the United States. We don't want to know.
Well, it's strange that and autopsy being done, but the thing to point there, you would know that let's say there was 100 million deaths over a 10-year period. The real disaster apart from that is it's usually 10 times or greater injury rate to death. So if it got to 100 million deaths, we're talking 1, maybe 2 billion injured, and some of them seriously for life.
Oh, yeah. No question about it. And those people stay quiet because they don't want to lose their friends and lose their jobs and all that. They know what the repercussions are, so they keep their mouth shut. And a lot of them will die and say nothing, which is a real tragedy.
Well, I
see there are all these celebrities.
Some journalists that attack anti-vaxxers. I mean, it's not a good idea to attack anti-vaxxers and take the vaccine, because it seems to be a thing called karma. But it's kind of like some of these people be dying on the deathbed from the COVID vaccine going, but it's not from the vaccine. It's like some people are never accepted.
Good thing I got that vaccine. Otherwise, it would have been worse.
It's like
that's the brainwashing that people have. Yeah. So, is there any opportunity where people like you and me can actually have a dialogue with anybody on mainstream media, or do they completely say, "Look, we don't want to talk to you. We don't want to give you any platform. Don't want to chat about it." Because that's what it is where I'm coming from, where I'm in the United States. It's like you really can't talk to anybody in the mainstream media. They're not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, well, let's put that challenge out there now. Anyone in the Australian media, Steve will be down in Australia to speak at the Independent Media Summit, July 19th to 20th. We're happy to put out a challenge there, have a public debate at the event or prior online. If any journalist or investigator or whoever wants to challenge myself or Steve, I mean, we both put up $1 million challenges. There's money to be made if they want to challenge us.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to stop the misinformation super spreaders, right? Because people like me cause people to have doubt in these safe and effective vaccines. And so it's important for the mainstream media to expose people such as myself because we're costing lives. So it's in the public interest for these mainstream journalists to debate me and show that I don't know what I'm talking about. And I'd love to do that because I know the data inside out.
Yeah, I agree, yeah. I mean, because we're dangerous misinformation super spreaders, which has clearly been shown with the data. So thanks, Steve, for your time. We've put that challenge out there, and we've got to July 19th, 20th, and you'll be here to see if anyone's brave enough to challenge journalist and misinformation super spreader Steve Kirsch all the way from San Francisco. Thanks for your time today, Steve.
Thanks, Jamie.
There we have it. That's all for this episode. Very interesting. And that's coming up, as I said, the event, Independent Media Award, first annual event hosted by Australian National Review. That will be July 19th, 20th, Gold Coast, Australia. Go to ANR.news now. You can get tickets from as little as $49. And also an awards night cocktail party. There'll be some of the journalists around the world that have been recognized: Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Ian Carroll, Whitney Webb. Many amazing independent journalists and many Australian ones have already been nominated for different categories. So don't miss that event. It will be very important and life-changing for many. That's all we have for time for this episode. We'll talk to you soon.
G'day, folks. I'm here with Jamie McIntyre, owner and founder of Lux Projects. Jamie, what's the latest going on over in Lombok?
Yeah, mate, it's very exciting. I love going there. I was just there recently, met with the government ministers, etc. They're even more excited than I am if that's possible. They just want to see development happen. South Lombok, if you look in Bali, it's the south part of Bali that has boomed. North part of Bali hasn't been developed. It's going to be the same in Lombok. It's 106 kilometers from where I live in Bali. Fast boat ferries they've approved, so we'll be able to put a fast boat into this beautiful beach you can see here. I think it's the nicest beach in Indonesia. I could be biased, but it's definitely the nicest beach I've been to. We bought up most of the area. It hasn't been developed yet. We're going to be very careful about the way we develop, make it sustainable, but really building, Dave, an expat community. So I'm going to live here as a second home. I'm inviting others, I guess, who want to have a second home in this beautiful part of the world. These are some of the villas that we already build in our Bali projects. We start building within 6 weeks, Dave, in Lombok. So we'll be building some of these homes, plenty of villas, but we're also building a gated community in suburbs for people that do want to live there more than just a week's holiday. So we're going to have a combination of both, and we're building a small town, Marina Bay it's called. It's going to have all the facilities. It's going to be, I think, the first planned town or small city in Indonesia. And so Bali Free Report or Lombok Free Report, you can go there and get all the information. So Lombok Free Report, check it out. We'll be doing a Zoom coming up very shortly, Dave, and covering more about leasehold, freehold. Lombok is freehold and leasehold. You can do both. So you have all these options. Very affordable compared to Australia.